If you look at the scrap yarn hoodie and you think that looks a lot more like a sweatshirt than a sweater, then you're right. My background is in garment construction and fashion design, which is why our approach for joining this scrap yarn hoodie might take you a second to wrap your head around. But our seaming strategy that we're going over today is very straightforward, and I'm sure you'll pick it up quite quickly. In this video, we will cover how to join together your crochet pieces for the scrap yarn hoodie using a slip stitch so that you can start forming the final piece and joining your pattern together. There are key moments below if you need to skip around. And if you're just finding this and wondering what is the scrap yarn hoodie, feel free to just jump back to the introduction that I'm linking right here. You may remember from the introduction video that this pattern is very quilt inspired. So we will begin our seaming process with the sleeve instead of the body, since there are more quilt blocks per se in the sleeve to visualize. And once you can seam that together, the body and the hood by comparison will seem relatively easy. For this particular demo, you will need your diamonds ready to go, at least a couple to practice with, your size 5mm hook that you've been using throughout the pattern, and some sort of yarn that won't be too conspicuous with the colors of your diamonds. The same yarn that you were using to create these would be perfect. Getting ready to start seaming. You will use a slip stitch with your two pieces facing each other. In sewing, we'd say you're putting your two right sides facing together. And while there isn't necessarily a right side up for your crochet diamond, since you've been crocheting back and forth, you do want to pick one side. And then once you've started that seaming process, you want to stick with that same side being one direction. Otherwise, you'll start seeing seams on some pieces and not on the others, but that will become pretty obvious quite quickly. So we have our diamonds. We are ready to start seaming. You're generally going to be seaming 1/4 of a diamond at a time. And so we're going to start with those two lined up on top of each other. Another thing that's super handy to have is if you have some stitch markers that you can use. They don't have to be a particular kind, just so that you can mark where your pieces come together. So I always like to mark this midpoint here because it seems like it's really obvious until you're actually doing the seaming, and then it's really easy to miss it. So I'm going to loop those two together here and just have that so that they're held together. And then depending on the direction that I'm going to be doing the slip stitch, I might do this one on the end as well, with this being the side that we're going to be doing our slip stitch on. If we look at the sides of these diamonds from the top, what you can see here is we have a bunch of holes. So you have kind of the longer one followed by a smaller one here, going all along, and you can see that on the other side. And so we are going to seam those two together to form that seam. To just have your slip knot on your hook, and we're going to pick which direction we're going to seam together first. So in this case, I'm going to actually start at the top and seam to the bottom. To do our very first stitch here, I'm just going to go through and do my first little slip stitch and pull that tight. And then we're just going to start going kind of one for one down here. So there's a nice little trick as we go in. I'm going to go through both pieces, grab it, then pull it back through, and you're going to get a nice chain view on this side. And on this side, there'll just be one single stitch, and that's your classic slip stitch. It's okay to not do this perfectly evenly all the way down if you're concerned about making sure you're at exactly like one for one even. It really doesn't matter. You just kind of want to even it out-ish by the time you get to the bottom. So I might need to skip forward just a touch because it looks like it wasn't super even there, so that you finish just like that. And then I'm going to do one chain there to give that a nice little tight seam. And then we open it up. You can see all of these guys lined up. On the other side, when we turn this around, this really nice raised up effect, which makes it look like it's been quilted and padded, which is one of the effects that is so nice about this particular garment. So again, I'm just going to take this out and we're going to do it one more time. We have our 2 stitch markers here. So one more time, we're going to just run through. You're going to grab your slip knot and do your first slip stitch. And then we're just going to start slipping all the way down. Every time you find a hole, even though this is a bigger hole, you're only going to go through it once. And I seem to have found a little smaller one on the other side. That's totally fine. But I'm going to go in this next one, find this slightly bigger one, just slip through here. Just wherever there seems to be holes on that edge there is great. And see, I seem to have kind of evened out a little bit. Not really worried as long as I'm getting all the way down to my last one here. And then I'm just going to do, again, that little chain. So it's a little bit tighter. So this is now your interior seam. So this is now always going to be the wrong side. So let's keep going and actually form one of our first quilt blocks, which is the 7-sided star. I have a bunch of diamonds pre-made here and it's super Easter eggy. So I'm actually going to lay it out really quick and just make sure I like the way the pattern looks when I put them all together. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, so I'll do this one going this way. So I'll just stack them so I know where I'm going. I'm going to take my seam markers here and I'm going to join it to the very next piece just so that I can see where these two come together. I'm not going to bother doing the bottom marker on this one since I'm starting that seam at the bottom. So it should be pretty easy to make sure those are lined up facing each other so that the seam will be out. So I'm making sure that that's looking good. Right sides together. I'm going to start in this stitch here. Okay. So I have my first slip stitch and that was already on my hook from doing the previous seam. So I'm just going to start slipping all the way down here, finding my next little holes there. So there's one, here's another one, and then just a little slip stitch. Here's another even hole, and just keep doing that until I hit my next stitch marker. I'm done with this. I'll take my stitch marker out. And then since I've gone down and gone up, there's not another seam to do right here. So I'm just going to break this and then pull it through on my last little chain and then leave that for now, just in case. I'm going to leave a nice long tail in case for some reason I don't like it. I want to pull it apart. Then I can just grab that and then unravel it if I want to. Okay, so we have 3. Next step, I'm going to keep going. And you can just pick which side to you looks like it should be up. Start the top. So I'm going to put a little stitch marker down here and do another one up here so that I'm nice and lined up, and then off we go. So we're just going to start with a nice little slip there. And then I'm going to pull out my little yarn marker, find the next space, slip stitch through all the way down. Okay, and now I'm ready to go up the other side with my next piece. So again, I'm gonna take my stitch marker, toss this one on here, and then just keep on going. And you might be able to tell from this angle that it does get a little bit fuzzy to see exactly where the kind of apex of that point is, where you want to stop connecting. So it does really help to have that stitch marker. So we need 7 sides. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 more to go. And again, you can see all of the seams are on the underside here. Really start to see how that comes together. really nice raised shape without any padding. So let's keep going. Now I'm going to add my last piece. Once you have all 7 pieces joined, if you notice that you have one piece where it looks like you didn't quite get the ends in there, while you still have that nice piece of thread hanging out, I'm just going to go around once and just grab each of the ends in there and just do a slip between them all to just make sure I'm closing that. So here's our wrong side and here is our right side, and we have a fully completed 7-sided star quilt piece. Throughout the entire scrap yarn hoodie, there are 2 types of quilt blocks that you're going to do. You're going to do a 7-sided star like this in some sort of variation. There might be some where you're only doing 4, in which case you stop after doing 4 of these or 3 of these. And then you have a hexagon that you're going to do, which is essentially just if you took the 2 ends here and you put another diamond in between those 2 to fill that space, you now have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided shape. So even though it's off of the 7-sided star, it's still that exact same shape. So you can see here, it's just gonna be this hexagon. So that's the other thing that we're primarily going to be seaming. So I will cover how to do that as well. What we're going to do is you're going to take your non-primary color, just kind of like our background color, and we're going to seam this in between these 2 spaces. So we're seaming with right sides facing. So I'm going to put this on top. And right where these 2 come together, I'm going to hook through actually both of them and then try to hook through this top point here as well. Okay. And then we're going to start with this side and then we're going to do this side and see how that nicely rotates. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stitch marker and put it in this end. And this will be the side that I start with, just seaming these 2 things together. So it is a little tricky thinking about that right sides together thing, but I hope that this is helping to explain it. I'm actually going to switch to a slightly fuzzier yarn here just to give a little variety and seeing what it looks like as you do it. We're going to start just like everything else with your easy little slip knot at that very end. So I'm going to try to capture that point there. Do my first slip stitch and then go in that very first space here, slip. And right here, I'm already so thankful that I have the stitch marker holding this in place, because it would be very easy to lose my place and not see how these line up. But this kind of forces it to stay. So I'm going in this next little hole. So find that first hole there, find another one on the other side. And we're just going to keep doing that all the way down. And I think this yarn shows, again, you get that really nice chain on top and just a little stitch through the back, all the way until I reach my stitch marker. Okay, now go ahead and take it out because I want this last stitch here, this kind of that point, that apex, to go in both of these. So I'm going to go in this one. And then I'm actually going to do a chain here, and then I'm going to go and stitch in here again. That just helps me personally change directions. So I did that one chain to change directions. Let me do that one more time. So even if it means I have to stitch twice in this last one that's joining the 2 together in order to get that little apex, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and do that. Then I'm going to chain 1 to change directions on the seam, And then I am going to go in that next one and grab that first hole and do my slip stitch. But before I go any further, so I have my yarn is holding this in place, I'm going to grab my stitch marker and line up this seam here so that I make sure I don't miss anything, stitching all the way across. So the seam itself is really easy. The slip stitch couldn't be easier using your crochet hook. However, it is the lining everything up with right sides facing that is where it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Okay, then we're going to do our last two and then do our chain one. And I'm going to let that guy end for now. Take these out. You can see from the wrong side, we have this nice little seam running through. And then from the right side, how lovely does that look? So here it is. And so if you're seaming your hexagon, that's exactly how that looks. If you're new to this type of thing and you're having any difficulty, what I would recommend is that you first do a border stitch on your diamonds so that you can start to see where those little pieces are. So if I'm going to do a border stitch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a slip stitch. So first I'm going to start with just a little chain to get that started, but I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a slip stitch on every single hole that I find on the very edge. So that's a longer one. So I'm just still going to do a slip stitch, shorter one, longer one, shorter one. They each only get one. So I'm going to do a little slip stitch border so I can see where each of these are. Now your slip stitch is going to end up on one side, which is kind of the nature of a slip stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to pull that through, tie that off. So I'm just going to run through and do that on this side too. It'll take you just a little bit longer, but you'll be able to see a lot better what you're joining together, which I think will help. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to just do a slip stitch in each of those spaces so that I can see it. Doing it in a really high contrast yarn as well is always nice. So I only need that halfway to kind of show you what we're trying to do here. Say I'm joining these together. These are now going to become my right sides where the stitch is facing up. And I'm going to join them together. Now, these pieces are not the same size, but it still will prove a point. If I'm starting to seam these together, you can now see where each of the stitches are, right? So I'm going to go in this first one, and I'm going to grab that. I go in here, and then I'm going to line it up and grab that. And what you're going to see is it basically shows you, so I'm looking where those two come together, where each of these little bumps are. So there's that. And then there's where it comes together. Oh, I already used that one. Next one. I missed one, so I'm just going to double up. So I'm going to go in this one twice and then grab up ahead one more forward, go in the next one where those little V's form. And all this is doing, again, is guiding you as to how to find those stitches. So you did a little bit of extra work, but as a result, what ends up happening is you have a really clear guide as to where you should be doing those stitches. Then you go ahead and finish this guy off. You'll see from the other side, there is a little bit more of a visible seam because you do have those slip stitches that you're working with. What it did help us to do is see all of those stitches where we should be seaming things together. And if you're having trouble, again, visualizing where all those little bumps are, you'll notice your slip stitch will basically find them for you. And then when you go in to do your slip stitch seam, just come out really nicely and really easily like that. And you can see these are two very different size pieces, but by doing our slip stitch in that way, this is how you kind of force a bigger piece to be a little bit smaller. And that is how, if you need a little bit of training wheels on the seaming, I would do it like that so that you have that slip stitch to guide you as to where you should be going. So once you start making all of your quilt blocks and feel comfortable with that seaming, then you'll be ready for the next video, and I'll see you right there.